Welcome to the 67th reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. I Want a Baby. February 1968 found me without a job, but in no mood to look for one. I told Brian I needed a break. I spent my days up in Phyllis and Ian's flat. Ian was working towards his PhD, the same as Brian, so was rarely home. David and Katie were 3 and 5 years old, and Phyllis allowed me to read stories to them while she did housework. "You'll make a good mother one day," she said, idly glancing over at me. She seemed to accept my temporary aimlessness. Brian and I looked after their little guinea pig when they went away for a weekend. I don't know if the influence of her contented family life or the satisfactory squeaking noises of the little guinea pig in its box beside my bed affected me, but my maternal hormones kicked in. The desire to have a baby consumed my thoughts. At first I didn't say anything to Brian, but did send away for mother care catalogues, and he'd come home from the lab late at night to find me tucked up in bed, reading them intensely from cover to cover. Once he realized my bedtime reading habits had taken a strange detour, he asked what was on my mind, as if he didn't know. All wrapped up in his studying, he had no desire to start a family, but because I wouldn't stop talking about it, he agreed to us trying for a baby on December 1st. Maybe the date seemed far enough away to give him time to adjust to the idea of becoming a father. I made him mark it on the calendar so he wouldn't forget his obligation to me. Once the date was set for me to conceive, I felt already in that happy state, although the chances for it happening, other than an accident, were all of 9 months away. Curiously enough, the exact duration of a normal pregnancy. Brian was less excited than me because this whole baby thing descended on him without any warning. Suddenly it wasn't only the pair of us in our cozy little love nest. The constant presence of another little, as yet unmade, person interrupted the flow of our lives in a strong way. I became obsessed with preparations for my baby's arrival. I talked Brian into the purchase of a second-hand cot. We arranged to have it delivered to our flat. When the cot arrived, I set it up in our bedroom and took comfort in imagining our little baby in it. Then I experienced a compulsion to climb into it. I curled up inside, hoping I wouldn't break the bottom out. How will I explain that to Brian? Thumb in my mouth, gazing out through the bars, trying to revisit babyhood. An impossible feat. Life pushed me inexorably onwards. I could not return, yet something beckoned me. My thoughts went back to when I first moved into adolescence, a subtle shifting from childhood into a different awareness. So many times I'd gazed into the mirror and seen reflected back somebody I barely recognized. I didn't like what I saw. I wanted my little girl eyes to still be there, but each time I looked, they lost more and more of their innocence till they became something I had no choice but to accept. A pair of grown-up eyes staring back at the child I still perceived myself to be. Brian's parents visited and were puzzled by my strange behavior while at the park. I ignored them, sat under a tree and knitted a baby cardigan for the baby not yet conceived. Brian's mother asked, with no hint of excitement on her face, why I was knitting a baby garment. "It's for a friend's baby," I lied, but she didn't look too convinced. She gave Brian a weird look, but he kept silent. Perhaps I embarrassed him. I sensed my in-laws were not open enough to be remotely excited over a possible grandchild. A distinct shame hovered around my desire to want a baby. Brian didn't want to discuss it openly either. I had never been on the pill, so had no reason to believe I'd have trouble conceiving, but I still gave in to doubts and fears. Since leaving the hospital, I'd relapsed into my old negative thought patterns, reminded constantly of my fragile state of mind. One day, after a week of repetitive head-thumping thoughts that made me want to curl up in a ball and die, I convinced myself that it would be terribly wrong for me to become pregnant. The overpowering realization of what I would be doing to an innocent little baby, if by some chance it happened to inherit my peculiar malady, swept over me. For days I struggled with the quandary. So unfair I should be denied motherhood. Yet I remained convinced I would have to tell Brian. Perhaps he would be relieved and wouldn't want to go into the reason for my sudden change of heart. But on the other hand, perhaps he would. I didn't know how to explain it to him. Oh, by the way, Brian, I spend countless hours repeating useless sentences over and over in my mind until my head feels like it's about to explode. And all the time I'm doing it, I know it's stupid, and yet I do it because it's the only thing preventing me from going completely crazy. At the same time, I think I am already crazy because what I'm doing isn't normal. By the simple fact that I can't tell anyone about it. They'd laugh their heads off if I did. And where would that leave me? I'm caught in an infinite loop, and I can't get out. So I've decided not to have children, okay? I wondered what he'd say. My biggest fear was that he would cart me off to a mental institution where I'd be diagnosed with some incurable mental illness. In other words, declared insane and locked up for good. No chance then of me ever becoming a mother. I couldn't do it. I decided to ignore the inner voice telling me to do the right thing. Although surrounded by guilt, something wouldn't let me make so large a sacrifice. Anyway, I didn't know what was right or wrong for me anymore. So much had gone askew in my life. I wanted to have what other people had, children. Was that too much to ask? Perhaps if I did have children of my own to care for, they in themselves would help save me, give me a reason to go on. In April, after 2 months of idleness and introspection, I became employed as a daily nanny to 2 small children in St. John's Wood, an affluent area near Regent's Park, the London Zoo, and Abbey Road Studios, where the Beatles recorded most of their music. To add some excitement to my new position, I bumped into Paul McCartney, strolling in Regent's Park with his old English sheepdog named Martha, accompanied by a couple of bodyguards. Paul lived at 7 Cavendish Avenue, a short walk from my place of work, but each time I went there, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, I was disappointed. The property boasted a very high brick wall all around it. Mr. and Mrs. Potts, my new employers, owned a clothing factory and worked long days, so my days were also long. The large high-rise block of flats where they lived were considered luxury accommodations. A lift took residents to each floor, but the small flat was cramped with only 2 bedrooms. 4-year-old Marie and 2-year-old Peter shared a tiny room, leaving barely space for them to play between both beds. After finishing household chores, I regularly took the children out to Regent's Park or Primrose Hill to let off some steam. If it poured with rain and we stayed home, the flat's small lounge full of ornate furniture and glass-topped tables, offered nowhere to play, and they became irritable in their cramped quarters. Their frustration rubbed off on me and caused me to lose patience with them more often than they deserved. Despite the roominess of the flat Brian and I occupied, I laugh now when I remember how ignorant we were over the state of it. One morning we noticed that the clothes, casually tossed on the floor at bedtime, had a strange silvery trail all over them. "I think you should put out some slug bait and see what you catch," one of Brian's friends suggested. Sure enough, in the morning, a large slug lay dead beside our clothes, and the mystery solved. Not the last of our problems, however. Mould appeared on our shoes and clothes in the cupboard. My wedding dress fell prey to the same fate and had to be put in the dustbin to be carted away. We abandoned the bedroom and switched the furniture around so we could sleep in the living room. Called the landlord to investigate the dampness. By the time he came, the furniture stored in the bedroom was covered with a thick green mould. He was furious. Time to find another flat. In August, we said our goodbyes to Ian and Phyllis and moved into our new, unfurnished flat in Chelsea. 93 Elm Park Mansions on Park Walk was one of 200 flats in the 5 Victorian red brick mansion blocks, situated halfway between Fulham Road and the famous King's Road. There were no appliances and nothing on the floor but rough floorboards. We laid newspapers all over the floorboards for insulation and put down carpet. We bought second-hand furniture, which we painted green, and decorated the flat in garish, typical late 1960s colours, orange and purple. Colour overload. The double bed and gas cooker were purchased new. The small fridge had to go in the lounge as it wouldn't fit in the kitchen. Piece by piece, our flat became a cosy home. We invited Brian's twin brother, Barry, and his new wife, Jill, to see our latest abode. Brian had been best man at their wedding in January. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading, and hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.